Allow me to introduce myself as I welcome you. And my name is Dexter Vallis. I am your host for today. And along with me in our hosting team, I have Nandini Agaskar and our co-host Saraswati Anand. I lead the COP vertical for ICF Mumbai Charter Chapter. And Saraswati is a senior member of our chapter, and she will support us through this webinar and especially with the Q&A segment. Nandini, as always, will be helping us with admin and tech. God bless her. I don't know what we do without her. Nandini works very closely, probably far too closely for her comfort with ICF Mumbai Charter Chapter and is always in demand, probably more than any one of us. So for today's session, we will be receiving what's approved from ICF, which is 1 CCEU and 0.5 RD, Resource Development Credits. There will be a claim form that comes towards the end of the session. So please keep a lookout in your chat box. We will, of course, alert you towards the end. You have a couple of days to fill up the claim form, which is by around 20th December, you should make your claim. Participants who are eligible to receive their CCEUs by 30th will get it by 30th December. So about 10 days from the day you fill your form. Well, some hygiene factors for the session. As much as possible, keep yourself on mute unless you have something very urgent to announce. But then if you put it in the chat, Saraswati will pick up on that and alert us. So being on mute most of the time is recommended. Of course, we will keep releasing mute for you to participate vocally too. So your voice will be heard. And yes, if you are on camera, please stay on camera. If you need to disappear for a while, we'll understand, but don't take too long coming back. Well, we need to make memories also. So somewhere along the way, towards the end, we shall request you all to be on camera for a group photo. And we hope that you have practiced your smile so that we can get the best of it while we take those photos. There will also be a feedback poll, which is launched immediately after the Q&A session or as the Q&A session ends. So please look out for it. When you fill up your form for CCUs, please fill up the name as you would like to receive it in your CCU certificate. And also mention the correct email ID that you will need for us to send this back to you at. I think that's something really important. We've had sometimes things that have gone astray or awry because those were not correct. Well, then nothing is over till networking is put into play. So if we have sufficient time and if you are willing to stay on a little more, maybe a little beyond the scheduled time, we invite you to stay for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes of networking and sharing. I'm sure even Samir would probably be able to, manage that extra time.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you, Samir. So let me get on and segue that into introducing Samir, who is going to speak on today's topic, which is demystifying corporate coaching. And we're going to be co-creating along with Samir and all of us a valuable coaching knowledge and practice playbook. Samir is a veteran, former corporate senior director. He is also PCC certified with ICF. Now, Samir has been for a long time leading ER and HR portfolios in strategic business units and companies in very large, reputed global conglomerates. Those of you, and I'm sure you would have gone to his LinkedIn site, would know a lot about where he has worked and what he has done. He has an enormous amount of years of industry experience, 37 years, and going strong in FMCG, healthcare, consulting and construction products, handling a lot of diverse teams in most major geographies in the world, spanning Asia, Africa, Europe, and the US. So he's more than qualified and experienced to talk to us today. Currently, Samir is a coach and consultant in human and organizational development engaged in HR business partnership at Samir Nagarajan Services. He is usually based in the UAE, but he is with us in India today, not, of course, in Mumbai. He's been kind of hop, skipping, and jumping across cities. Currently, he's in Hyderabad. And he engages in interventions that include life and leadership coaching. Naturally, drawing on his extensive knowledge and long years of experience in that space. One gem I must tell you about Samir, which you may not know, is that he is a creative artist with the paintbrush and the pen. Samir wrote his first book of delightful short stories, very intriguing ones, I must tell you, some years ago, a couple of years ago, in 2023, February, if I'm not mistaken, titled The Parijat Tree, and the cover of which is actually one of his own paintings. Not stopping there, he's now in the process of writing a novel. Who knows, he may write about this webinar. I can't wait to get my hands on that novel, Samir.
I write only fiction.
You write only fiction. This is reality. But sometimes there's a blurred line, right? So we are delighted to have you with us, Samir, to share your wisdom and insights today. Over to you, Samir. We are going to eagerly be waiting to hear from you. And with that cue, I am going to share my screen and the PowerPoint that we have in store.
Thank you, Dexter. While you're doing that, I must say that it is my pleasure to be interacting with all of you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're always very modest, Samir, but thank you for saying that.
So we are going to spend the next hour and a half, I believe, right, Dexter, talking about demystifying corporate coaching and, talking a little bit about what some of the paradoxes and some of the critical issues in corporate coaching are. And, these are typically encountered by most coaches who aim to do work with corporates and individuals in corporates. So we'll be talking, I think, maybe go on to the next slide. I think, and I think
This is a good question. I was thinking of asking you, Samir, but you've already got the question there. So can you tell us more about this?
Why do corporates invest in coaching? What I'd really like to do, if possible, is to spare a minute or two for the participants in the session to type into the chat box, what do you think are the reasons why corporates invest in coaching? And you can speak from your own experience or from observation. But I mean, I do have a view, I do have thoughts around it, and come to that in a minute. But I'd just like to hear from across the group first. Hear means see on the box.
It's a great idea. Yeah, great idea.
Okay, so you have developing leaders. I'm just going to read it out of chat, Samir, as it is coming.
Yes, please.
Lovely.
Performance management, improvement, professional development, behavior change.
Yeah.
Performance coaching, team coaching, maintain productivity. All right. Improve organizational culture. Alok, you may have to explain externalizing a bit more. Empowering people for success, preparing leaders for the next level, leadership development, corporate invest in coaching to co-create self-awareness, self-development for people managers to up their game, retention. Okay. That sounds like a hard reality as well, Ajit. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Adults don't learn from others as much as they learn from their own reflections. Wonderful, Ramesh. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
High-performing individuals and teams build talent for the future, personal, team, organization leadership. And one more, I think, hard truth could be because the board asks them to. and that is Manisha.
Yes. I think build company resilience. Okay.
Yes.
Fair enough. I think we've crossed about a minute now, haven't we, Saraswati?
Sure.
So look, all the points that you ladies and gentlemen have made are correct. I mean, obviously, this question does not have a right or wrong answer, including the one about, yes, regretfully, sometimes people do it because the board has asked them to do it or the boss has asked them to do it. But broadly, if you try bucketing it into broad heads, the first one is long-term growth. Yes, there is a sense that that there's some sense of building for the future, building capabilities, building competencies. But the second is, of course, addressing immediate issues in the context of a work situation. And more specifically, so one is in the context of a work situation to say that this is a very effective person, but there are one or two behaviors that this person displays that need to be addressed. The third is, of course, that this is sometimes becomes very sharp because it's in the context of potential derailers, which are communicated to the individual specifically at a particular time which is, let's say, high stakes and high impact for the individual. One of the people whom I coached, for instance, worked in a company where you had a limited number of opportunities to go to the next level, let's say from senior management to top management. And it was a process. It was something like an assessment center spread over 4 to 6 months. And he'd been through it twice. There was also a limitation on the number of times you could do it. You would not lose your job if you didn't clear it, but you would then know that you're going to be at the same level for as long as you were with that company. And this gentleman, so I had completed 2 attempts, received very sharp feedback. It's difficult to put numeracy onto things like this, but let's say in terms of the number of criteria, about 8 of them he was very strong, but the other two were not so strong. So he came into the process with a huge amount of motivation, saying, these two are the things I need to work on. You have to help me get through it. And the larger issue there is, of course, that then it gets viewed as a remedial intervention. It's a bit like saying, I'm not okay, fix me. And the faster you fix me, the better. But that's the third. The reality is that, yes, sometimes we are called in a situation to say that, you need to come in and set this right. And sometimes, therefore, with that narrow focus, missing out on the larger picture of development, which is really what coaching is all about. And hence the fourth point that there is some amount of interest developing in coaching as an overall development intervention, saying that this builds capability for the organization, builds leadership, builds capacity, builds for the future. And that really is where the I think the value of coaching in corporates lies. In reality, also, is it going to be any one of these only? Not likely. Depending on whom you're talking to, and sometimes from the same person, you might find multiple perspectives emerging on what the driver is. But typically, there will be one key driver, which is important to zero in onto in the conversation itself. Yeah.
Thanks, Samir. I think you've broadly covered that, and I'm sure we are going to go more into it when we come to the individual CCEOs. Yes, Saraswati, you want to, add something here?
So I just wanted to ask Samir, is there a trend that you're noticing? Because earlier, um, only few select people would get coaching. So is there a trend that you're noticing where does it still remain with the few people like the top leaders or the high potential people, that is, whom organizations invest in coaching? Or is it also there? I mean, is there a shift that is being observed to others as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Saraswati. I think of 10 years back, I think it was definitely a top management board, potential board level person kind of prerogative. I think over the years, it's progressively got democratized. And it's, I think, been through all those stages. It was CXOs, then it was high potentials. Then I think there was an argument that raged for a while with HR guys, including myself at times, saying, why? Why is this only for high potentials? I mean, is it that I understand the resource constraint? I mean, I can understand that you say that you've got 500 managers in the company and you can't coach all 500 because you've got a budget. Fair enough. But having said that, isn't it true that it's another form of development? Like you do training, you encourage people to subscribe to online learning, subscribe to websites. This is another powerful developmental intervention that we can all use. And increasingly, I think it is getting democratized. I think there is a lot of attention being paid to how This coaching can be played out in various situations. So, for example, the focus on team coaching, which is just emerging, is again to me a demonstration of the fact that it is getting democratized. So, absolutely right. I think bang on.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Saraswati. And Samir, since we are looking through the corporate lens, I know that you are looking at some of these competencies of ICF, some of the core competencies, not all of them today. Do you want to, and they're the first four, and of course the eighth, which is, ultimately what one is trying to achieve.
Mm.
Would you want to, just make a mention about why are we looking at these first four? What about five, six, seven?
Yeah, I think that's an important question, Dexter. Thanks. Let's kind of spend a minute or two on that. Of course, all the CCs are important. I'm not for a moment saying that some are more important than others, or that if you focus on these, you'll kind of, achieve some qualification or achieve some degree or something like that. I think to me the difference, there are two or three major points of why I've focused on these. Ethical practice, embodying a coaching mindset, establishing and maintaining agreements, cultivating trust and safety in order to facilitate client growth. Uh, if you look at these four, these are what you display. These are things that the people around you can see. These are things that your potential client, the corporate that you're interacting with, the HR teams you're talking to will be able to see. And because they're behavioral, you demonstrate, you embody, you establish, you cultivate. Uh, to me, CC 5, 6, and 7 are a little more personal. It's like, great listening skills, be present. I mean, while it's true to a certain extent that the people around you can see whether you're present or not, or whether your mind is wandering off somewhere, to me, these four are a little more visible and to that extent more critical. I think in practice, I've found that a lot of corporates and a lot of HR leaders are quick to catch on to whether these four are practiced or not. And typically, in informal references, in informal conversations, these are the kind of topics that come up. Is this person reliable? Is this, how does he or she maintain confidentiality? Do they comply with ethics? Now, corporates and clients may not know the core competencies of ICF in the classical pristine sense, but they do have a very good idea what they're looking for. And to me, this seems to make a lot of difference when I'm talking to them. Typically, for example, when I start talking, when a company approaches me for the first time, when I start talking to the HR leader for the first time, without getting too pedantic about it and without using too much of jargon, I like to talk about a few of these things. These are the ethics that we practice. This is what confidentiality is about. This is what coaching does and doesn't do. It's about establishing that credibility early on, saying that there is a difference between coaching, counseling, mentoring. These are all very different contexts, and what we are talking about is coaching here. So that's the reason why I kind of focus on these five. And of course, at the end of it, the CC8, of course, at the end of it, there has to be a shift. And the client must be able to experience the shift and report it. So to me, that's important because, and from a corporate coaching point of view, it's important because that's why people come back to you. That's why you get called in a second time or a third time, because you can see that the individual has shifted and has made a change. And if you haven't achieved that, then corporates are places that measure things a lot. And so, when they see that something has changed, when they can observe that something has changed, then then results have been delivered. But you can't wait for that to happen by chance. So, for example, when you say, establishing and maintaining agreements, it's like, what is going to shift? Now, the practice of coaching, the practice of all the training that we do in the process of, getting the ACC, PCC, and of course going forward as well, basically keeps reinforcing that. How are you doing each of these? But in this session, I thought it was important to call these out.
So
Does
when
that
only
help?
Samir, you're saying this is what allows you to get your visa stamped on your corporate passport.
In a sense, yes. I
In
mean,
that
that's
sense, I mean, I'm making light of it, but it's
evocative way of putting it. Yes, absolutely.
yeah. And we're not forgetting the five, six, seven because they are important. They kind of cluster around these once you kind of, create create your reputation through this. And it's quite quick, right? I mean, Samir, I mean, this you don't corporates don't spend a long time trying to figure this out, right?
No, no. It's often very people are pressed for time. So
Yeah.
they will size up quickly, they will seek references, they will talk to others, they'll talk to other companies sometimes if required, get
So
information
that's
what you've
that's very
done.
important. Yes, your history, reputation around these, kind of gets thrown up. Lovely.
Totally, totally. Yeah.
Good. So shall we look at each of these one by one? If in the chat people want to, chat about, what they feel about what we've just said, please continue chatting, putting things in the chat. We will take a look and see what else. I think Saraswati, you would like to add something here.
So I just wanted to point out that there are some questions which are coming up,
Yeah.
and wanted to check in with Samir. Samir, should we bring them up as they're coming, or should we wait towards the end? How does that work for you?
I mean, I'm all right. I think we have an overall time frame as long as we I assume one of you is doing the timekeeping. So as long as we're
Sure.
reasonably good on time, I'm all right. Not a problem.
So allow me to, kind of collect them and, ask them later, towards the end, if
Sure.
that works. Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Think they are. I think that will work unless there's something that needs to be answered immediately, then we could always, kind of break protocol for that. I mean, there's no real protocol, but we can always jump to it. So, yep, leave it to your judgment, Saraswati. Yep, happy with that. So, this is the first competency. Now, I'm sure, Samir, you got to say a lot about this
Oh,
coming from
yes.
the corporate.
Yes, absolutely. So, in corporate coaching, there are actually three players involved. There's a coach, there is the individual client, and there is the corporate client. And for the moment, I'm using the corporate as a collective. Although, if, as we'll see subsequently, even that can be broken down into peers, HR, and line manager. There are actually three of them. But yeah, when you come into the situation, you are the coach, you are the prospective coach, there's a client, and there is the company that you're dealing with. Most likely, you've started the conversation with the HR team. And the next conversation, if all goes well, will be with the line manager. The third conversation would typically be with the individual. But each of them come in with very specific expectations, come in with very specific ideas on what they're looking for, and how the coach behaves, how I as a coach behave with the client, individual, and with the corporate team members actually demonstrates a great deal of professionalism. And it's important to remember that you are making this impact from sometimes from even before you have the first face-to-face meeting, the way you convey yourself or the way you communicate in an email interaction, but very definitely when you are speaking face to face. And the first three words I'll call out is openness, transparency, and professionalism. What does that mean? It's really about sticking to a process. Uh, I personally believe the ICF process, as described, is demonstrates a high standard of professionalism. It demonstrates a high standard of integrity. And yes, sometimes you need to talk through it. You need to explain it, but doing that kind of makes sure that people kind of believe you. They're like clear. So, for example, saying early on, like asking questions, what is your expectation? What do you really want? If they're coming in from a purely remedial kind of perspective, is that something that is the, questioning about what is the purpose of coaching, and is this all that there is to it, is something that one needs to bring into the discussion. At the same time, being realistic about what you can do and what you can't do. There are limitations to the process, and sometimes being clear that this is not a magic wand. You're not going to spend 2 sessions talking to me and suddenly find yourself being at whatever level you want to be. Whether you define that level as a level in an organization, or you define it as a level of fluency and competency in your own abilities, it's not a magic wand that I wave. It is something that you and I work together. We co-create within yourself. And in this context, referring to you as the individual client. Uh, Equally much when you're talking to the corporate, what is it that you can do, can't do, will do? What are all the contradictions? What are the pressure points that you deal with? I think primary pressure point, one point that I make very clear throughout is what is confidential and what is not. What is it that I'm willing to share with you? And I allow the individual client to determine this. Because there is, as a lot of information that's shared, some of which is not available to anyone else in the organization. So, treating that with the respect it deserves, making sure that you're not violating boundaries, you're making sure that you're dealing with everyone according to in a structured manner and in a basis a program that everyone has kind of agreed. That I think is the key to what I call ethical practice in coaching.
Could be interesting to ask participants to also put into the chat what are their experiences around CC1. But a question that I wanted to ask, and I know there's a situation you have here, maybe we'll just put that up and ask Samir, is there a possibility to recontract when you find that this, is becoming a challenge?
Oh yes, I think that's important. We will need to recontract if it's not kind of if the original contract is not working, or if the circumstances have changed to the point, or information is available to the point where something has changed dramatically, then we need to recontract. So I mean, if you look at the situation, I've had this once. One of the people I coached, he somewhere halfway through the process, you know, I got the sense that he was being very polite, that he was kind of giving me the nice answer, the politically correct answer, and I pushed a bit. I said, what really is happening here? And then he said, yeah, I mean, I've spent a long time in this company, and I'm waiting for this year's bonus to be paid out, because if I resign before the bonus is paid, then I won't get it.
Hmm.
That's the policy of the company. So I'm waiting for the bonus to be paid, after which I'll quit. And in the meantime, they asked me to meet you, so I'm meeting you. So a combination of what one of us described as, because the board asked you to do it. In this case, it was both BOARD and BORED. Both things happened at the same time. So yes, one had to. So then I asked him, therefore, if this is the case, well, this is not what was the original intent of this coaching. So do you think we need to go back? In which case we need to be clear. And he toyed around with the idea of it in the meeting itself, because he also was equally candid in saying that, most people don't spend more than X number of years in this company. So he said, even if I say it, it's not going to cause a great deal of surprise. I said, well, that's your choice. I mean, but I'm saying that either you stick to the original purpose and make the best of it. Hopefully, even if you do make a change, it will stand you in good stead going forward in any other organization. Or if you say that it's not serving a purpose, then let's recontract. Let's do something that is worthwhile for you. Except that since this coaching is in a corporate context, and since let's face it, the costs of the coaching are being borne by the company, I'll need to go back to them.
So, Samir, how welcome are you to recontract in terms of the eyes of the corporate? Do they, I mean, how does it work for the coach? Does the corporate start feeling the coach has not done their job and that's why he's recontracting? Do they look more to you or to their own employee? Or what's the kind of relationship that works through this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dexter, because the circumstances in which I have needed to recontract have primarily been situations of this sort, when information emerges which kind of makes it, very which means that the original objectives of the coaching have changed or are liable to change. They're not relevant anymore, in which case you go back. I think it depends on the circumstances of the coaching. I think it's not about an inability to coach, because I think
Correct.
with a certain amount of experience and number of hours you're able to. It's not really a question of your competence anymore, um, but it is about circumstances having changed. So organizations may not welcome the effort, but they will certainly welcome the honesty and the integrity that you bring into the process by saying that there is a recontracting required here. However, I will just add one particular dimension to it. If To me, a lot of the effectiveness of a coach in a coaching process revolves around self-awareness. You need to be aware of what you're bringing to the process, but you also need to be aware that none of us are perfect, and there are, in Jungian terms, what's your shadow? What's your blind spot? What triggers you? So for example, and I'm being absolutely transparent here, I hold fairness as a value. So if I see something that's being unfair, it kind of gets my temperature up. Now, those are situations where I actually have to watch myself, watch my own reactions and say, hey, chill. This is not about you. This is about the person sitting opposite you. You don't need to react to it in this situation, at least. Now, if without that self-awareness, it would have been possible for someone to manipulate me on that basis. If you get manipulated, you've already compromised the process. In which case, recontracting means effectively saying that you've lost your temper, or you've lost your cool, or you've lost your way in the process, and the client will also say, yeah, we've had 3, 4, 5 meetings, but no sense that we're going somewhere. Clients are diplomatic. They'll say, meetings have been good. We've had good discussions. What has changed? I'm not sure. But this is something that to me underlines the process. If that's the basis on which you're doing it, well, your honesty and integrity will still be appreciated.
Got it. But it's thin ice, isn't it, Samir?
In that situation, very thin ice.
Yeah. And there's one more question since we are on the topic of ethics. How ethical is it, or is it considered unethical if you actually divulge the specifics of the recontracting? Why? Or is that something one should not do?
Tricky. Facts and circumstances of each situation. Now, I've had a client who once told me that he has a specific condition for which he is receiving medical treatment and he's seeing a counselor. He also told me for good measure that no one in the company is aware of it. And he said that the basis for the contracting for the coaching arrangement was, those instances when either medication or counseling were, not on time. So now, what do you do in a situation like this? He was very clear that he didn't want anyone in the company to know about it. It's not an infectious condition. There's no issues of that sort. But he said people will assume that every time I make a mistake, they'll attribute it to my condition, and it will kind of affect my chances of growth in the company. I said, fair enough. So I said, so two possibilities. Now let's either we take this into the direction of why sometimes you miss your counseling sessions or miss your medication, or we say that there's really not a problem, in which case we need to go back to the HR team. Now, we took the decision that we did. Since he wanted to maintain confidentiality, that was never revealed. You couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. It wouldn't have, I mean, that would have destroyed my reputation within the company altogether, and
Yeah.
possibly in a few other companies as well. So you can't do that. If there
Yeah,
is,
and it would have done a lot of harm to the coachee too
absolutely.
in the
So it's
process.
important to have openness in that dialogue and say that, if we need to recontract, then,
What should we be saying?
very clear about what we're going to say and what we are not going to say.
Right.
Because recontracting will involve the entire company. And those three sets of stakeholders that I mentioned, there is the HR team, there is the line manager, and there are peers.
Right.
Peers may not find out, but HR team and line manager will definitely find out about it if you violate confidentiality, and their own trust levels will diminish. So no.
That can snowball into a horror story.
Mm.
Yeah.
It
Right.
does. Yeah.
Thank you. So,
And
sorry.
Dexter, if I may,
Yeah.
because there's a pertinent question that has come up with respect to ethics. And Shripad asks, if you could comment on HR pressurizing the coach to report about what is happening within the session.
Brilliant question. In fact, that was one of the things that I was also thinking of. I was wondering how many examples to introduce in this. You see, from where I am, it's Shripada, it's not even about pressurizing. Sometimes the HR head is my classmate from XLRA. And we're catching up after 30, 35 years, and he says, chal chai pite hain, baith, bol, kya ho raha hai? And somewhere along the way, it becomes like, by the way, you're coaching with Dexter. What's happening? How's it going? So so one is, of course, outright pressure. The other is, friendly, within quotes, friendly pressure of this sort. It's important for the coach to have a kind of mental script ready. Now, if I say all is going well, no problems, it's not going to stop there. The next question will be, all is going well. So you think he's moving in the right direction? Which direction is that? At the same time, you can't be absolutely blank wall and say, oh no, that's confidential. I'm not going to go there at all. So what now, as you know, the fact is that between coaching sessions, the client does some work. Yeah, that's what the, in session contracting is also about, saying that what were you supposed to do in the last 15, 30, 45 days, whatever it is, what did you do? What did you experiment with it? What did you find? Their data is generated from within the session itself. So very often I found the most effective answer is to smile and say, do you see some difference in the last 30 days? Have you noticed anything changing? I say this to whoever is asking me the question, and they will generate the data. Let's move it on from there. If they haven't seen anything changing, they've answered the question for you themselves. You don't need to say anything after that. Say anything as in you don't need to divulge anything material. You can carry on the conversation in the direction. So pressure will come. Again, be aware of what triggers you. You know, if I come and put my hand across your shoulder and say yes, 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 you know, I mean, I'm sure everything is going all right now. If you're going to get intimidated by my presence and say, ah, yes, I wanted to tell you, well, you
So
already.
that kind of segues into competency two. I'm also under time pressure, so I'm kind of pushing the slide forward
Oh,
because I
yes.
saw a good segue,
Sorry, sir. Yeah. All right.
which, yeah.
Yeah. So corporate clients are in a hurry. Not often is a polite word. They're always in a hurry, and they're looking for quick solutions served ready-made. Now, I come across this very often in my practice, Dexter, because 36 years in HR, industrial relations, worked overseas, expat assignments. Somewhere along the way, the question comes, how did you handle this? In your experience, what did you see? And I think, therefore, again, it's very important at the outset to say that coaching and mentoring are very, very different. We are not going to mix the two. I think ICF recommends that you contract separately for a mentoring arrangement, if that is the case, if the requirement is there, and I practice that very, very clearly. Because the moment you mix the two, then you're prescribing solutions. It won't work. So exactly that. Client wants me to draw on my technical expertise. You handled industrial relations. How did you handle dealing with XYZ government in ABC state, which is always in the news for, let's say, a difficult industrial relations climate? Right. Let's talk about that separately. We have a mentoring contract around that, or we can get into a mentoring engagement on that. But here, this discussion, this hour, we're talking about you.
So I think what you said earlier about managing the script in your mind kind of also flows into this.
Hmm.
Your coaching mindset, you've got to have that presence of mind or mindset with your script.
Yeah.
When you suddenly meet somebody in the canteen who says, hey, what's happening over there, as you were talking about that, don't get caught off guard because that script and the mindset
Hmm.
should be on alert at that point of time.
Correct. It's the trigger here is flattery. And
Huh.
in corporates, flattery is never very evident.
Okay.
Someone, it might just be a simple remark. You did a fantastic job on that one. 30% increase in sales in 1 month. How did you do it?
Oh my. Yeah. Okay.
You did it the way you did it. But that's the test. For how you respond in that instant is going to determine what happens next.
Yeah. So you got to be a coach inside the session and outside the session too. You can't leave your coaching hat in the room.
No, absolutely not.
I think that's a lovely tip. Thanks. I think the way these competencies flow into each other is so marvelous. Yes, sir, Saraswati, please jump in.
Yeah, because I think there's a pertinent question with respect to what Samir just spoke about in terms of mentoring.
Sure.
Avinash asks, um, a frequent conundrum is to deal with, should one be a purist coach or be a mentor kind of coach? What is working well with corporates' needs?
What is working well with corporates' needs? I mean, I'm just being a little thoughtful because, to my mind, there's no such thing as a mentor coach. You are either a mentor or you are a coach. Now, if the question is, should I bring in my mentoring practice into the organization side by side with my coaching practice? That's possible. Keep the two distinct, however, otherwise it becomes very difficult to distinguish between the two. Yeah, and the coaching will fail. Inevitably, the coaching will fail because mentoring is based on what? Mentoring is based on I've been there, I did this. I'm telling you that this works. There can be no coaching possible in that kind of a situation after that. Even if I don't phrase it in those terms, I say, for my example, I say that this is how I dealt with the XYZ government in ABC state, or this is how I increased sales 30% in 1 month. To you, it is flowing as knowledge, it's flowing as gyan. sorry to use a Hindi term there, but it was flowing as wisdom. This is, if I do this, I will get this outcome. Great, let's go out and do it. Session closed. So it won't work. Uh, yes, in my practice, I see both. Frankly, it's not. I don't see one or the other. Some of my clients do say that we'd like you to talk a bit more about HR and how, for example, how you've dealt with cross-cultural situations based on the fact that I worked in Switzerland. I lived in Switzerland, Sri Lanka, and now the UAE. So there are, at least aside from India, there are four cultures that I'm exposed to, four very different kind of cultures. So sometimes they ask me to draw on that. Sometimes they ask me to draw on the core HR experience. But my pushback to them always is, you need coaching or you need mentoring. The words might be different, but I'm trying to arrive at an answer to that question. If you want the two at the same time, we contract separately for that. And that I'm okay with.
And that brings us to CC3, which is about, understanding what you've agreed to and maintaining it.
We spoke a little bit about this in the course of the conversation so far, but the client, the individual client, and the corporates will have different needs.
Yeah.
HR is looking, so the client has a particular set of needs in the sense that the organization wants, if it's a remedial approach, the organization wants him or her to develop on 1, 2, and 3. If it's a developmental approach, it's more like, broader conversations about leadership and presence and effectiveness and so on. HR wants you to meet those needs, but there's also an informal expectation that you'll make the HR team look good because, after all, they're the ones who brought you into the company. So their concern is also about, making sure that the individual walks out of every meeting saying, yeah, that was good. That made me feel good. That's energy. I can do something with it. Line manager looking for distinct observable change. So each of these are going to come into it with, broadly speaking, these again, I'm not prescribing or saying that these are the only needs there are, but these will definitely predominate at least the initial set of interactions. We spoke about how much do you share and how much do you not share. It is to belabor a point. It is not good to be highly enthusiastic and talk about everything that changed and everything that happened in the session. Hold it. There's still time before you reach that stage, and you still need to get that script ready in your head in terms of what are we going to talk about and what are we going to do. And to each
This,
of these, yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm saying to each of these, the script can also be slightly different. What I tell the line manager might be slightly different from what I tell HR, depending on what one believes is the most appropriate. So, for example, I had a case of the situation was something like this. The line manager reported that the individual uh, always looks to me for direction. He or she does not come to me and say that this is my plan, this is how I'm going to do it. In the course of the discussion, it emerged that the individual was a little overawed by the line manager who had a reputation of his own and therefore found it more safe to say that, okay, in a polite kind of way to say, you tell me what to do. So once made aware of the need and so on, the individual then practiced the changing behavior first with peers and then with the boss's peers and then finally with the boss. So when the boss told me that nothing has changed, and I said, wait, it's going to take some time, but it will happen. And I didn't walk him through the steps that we had agreed with the client, with the individual. I said, it will happen, but wait until then. Counsel patience.
With regard to your situation, Samir, I have come across some funny instances when coaching has come after training. And in
You're right.
training, when one uses assessments, now what happens is some of the assessments catch not you by surprise, but your colleagues by surprise. Your assessment, let's say they say, hey, how is that? You don't look like that kind of assessment, or how is it possible? And then during the coaching, if they are, then broken up into cohorts, or then you get coaching, the most interesting thing they want to know is, how is the other guy doing? I remember his assessment being very strange, and then they will continue to tell you about the other person, taking up time in the coaching session.
Mm.
How do you, deal with this?
The problem with psychometrics is that the first time or the early few times people are exposed to it, they get hugely enthusiastic about it. I think, I mean, I'm always very clear. I say personality is a very complex and a very deep subject, and no particular psychometric grabs all of it. Now, Personally, I'm a certified MBTI facilitator. I don't use the MBTI in every coaching interaction. I don't recommend it in every situation either. It all depends, is the guiding answer. But for someone who comes and says, I don't agree with this, I say, "Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, you might be right, and the assessment might be wrong. So if it doesn't resonate with you, by all means, throw it out of the window. But let's talk about what resonates with you, and let's talk about what resonates with you about yourself. I'm not going to discuss Saraswati with Dexter, and that this emerged in that discussion, in that assessment, and this is what she said. Then you just need to, whether politely or bluntly, intervene and say that's not the point. That's not what we're going to be talking about in this part of the discussion.
Right.
Sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
No, go ahead.
that's also something for the assessment facilitator to have done. Maybe that's a different topic, but sometimes if the assessment is handed down as words of wisdom, you might have a situation of this sort. Otherwise, it is just a little bit of gossip that's happening. Then you
Yeah,
don't.
and the chances are this fellow will go and tell the other guy, we talked about you in the coaching session, and this is what was said.
And this is what
So,
the coach said.
and that is what would break competency for, which is the trust and safety
Yeah,
which
yeah,
one is hoping to achieve, or demonstrate.
absolutely. I mean, let's be clear. Corporates are political environments. When I was in a corporate, I was also pretty conscious of the politics of the corporate. Resources are limited. There are peers. All of you are competing for the same limited set of resources. That resource could be money, it could be people, it could be material, it could be something as basic as the time of your boss. You are in competition. In that competition, if therefore trust and safety is hugely important. If people don't believe that you're going to hold information, people don't believe that you're going to, respect their issues and their concerns, they will stop sharing with you. And the dynamics of the coaching situation I found are as such that, as I mentioned earlier as well, in a coaching situation, individuals often share a lot about themselves, which they wouldn't do otherwise, because they're also, exploring a safe space and seeing how you are trying to create a safe space. It will start with exploration. And in that exploration, people share a lot about themselves. And if you then reveal stuff inadvertently, there is a problem. Why is this important? Because, for example, a lot of coaching interventions nowadays seem to include 360-degree feedback, where the 360 is gathered. It's not 360, strictly speaking, it's 180. It doesn't include people outside the organization, but between peers, line managers, and subordinates, there's pretty much the universe covered. And if you reveal a lot, sorry, when you receive a lot of information, or when you are talking to a peer, if it's a face-to-face interaction to draw out information, at some point the peer of the coachee is going to say, okay, so why so much of a focus on XYZ? What does that mean about the person being coached? You need to be clear how you approach it, and therefore it's I'm saying, you don't go into a discussion of this sort saying, okay, tell me about Dexter's ability to manage. The guy sitting opposite you is picking this up. He says, oh, Dexter's ability to manage, so we're going to talk about Dexter as a team manager. Is that what this coaching is all about? Therefore, build up on it and handle it diplomatically. And of course, there is a lot of power that the coach is also seen to have in the larger organization. So if you look at the situation, how do can someone use me as a coach to convey information about them to the boss? It's an easier way of, within quotes, easier way of gaining publicity. It adds on the coach's more own power and credibility to the process. I mean, I'm very conscious. If I go to a line manager and say that the person I'm coaching seems to have achieved a lot, or and saying even in a purely business context, seems to have displayed tremendous energy and drive in the preparation for the Diwali sales, it is going to be seen as, are you trying to endorse the individual coach's performance to the line manager? If you're doing it consciously, if there is a conscious reason to do it, I'm giving you an example out of context, but if there's a good reason to do it, by all means do it. But otherwise, be aware that it's going to diminish the line manager's trust in you, for example.
So, Samir, it could be both ways. I mean, even corporate could try to send messages through you to the coachee, especially if you're a very powerful coachee in the organization who means a lot. I guess direct messages may not work or may upset the coachee, and therefore, you never know. I mean, I keep thinking of, each of these people trying to fire the gun from the coachee's shoulder at each other. And that wouldn't be very good for the coach's ears, uh, you know.
I think it's important to make sure that the coach is not the coach's conversation with coachee is not the first time that the coachee is hearing that feedback, unless it is by design. What do I mean by that? If part of the process includes a 360-degree survey and sharing the results, well, then yes, it would be the first time he's hearing it. Most of the while, that's not the case. Most of the while, the feedback has already flowed through an appraisal system or a potential assessment system or a performance assessment system. It's already flowed through some kind of multi-rater feedback. And whether good news or bad news, it's important to encourage the line manager to have the conversation first. As I said, unless the feedback is coming through the coaching process itself. I would be quite clear in such cases and say that, if you've not had this conversation as yet, why have you not had it? What's the issue? Because then there is a larger issue to the HR team in terms of the overall appraisal process not working or
So, if
the
in the
overall
way you're
process.
approached, Samir, if you start sensing that there's a hidden agenda or unseen agenda, is it okay to call it out or, to figure out what's happening, or how do you, navigate around that?
With care and with thought. I mean, personally, I believe I have a fairly well-developed sense of intuition, and
Okay.
based on past experience as well as based on an understanding of the facts in front of me. But I'm also pretty careful about this. Look, early in the process, if you jump in and say, I sense something like this happening, I mean, if the coachee is not prepared for it, he might just turn around and say, no, I don't agree with you. In
Mm,
which case that leaves you a bit, shaky in terms of having to apologize, even if no matter how much kind of do ifs and buts. Effectively, you've made a statement that you're going to apologize for. That is going to carry its own ramifications.
mm,
Conversely, would I do this with the HR team? Say, for this example, for example, that the coachee has not been given any a particular piece of feedback. Does it reflect on the communication system of the organization itself? I would ask questions. In an ideal world, you'd like to ask the questions and help the coachee or the HR team or the line manager, whoever it is you're talking to, reach the conclusion themselves.
okay.
Having said that, if you have a lot of experience, you have a certain comfort level, experience with the organization, you have a certain comfort level with the stakeholders, you believe that it's a chance that can be taken, and it's not a fundamentally positioning kind of assessment, then you could try it. But as I said, I would proceed with caution in such a case because
Absolutely. Because ultimately, this could get jeopardized, competency eight.
correct, correct. And this I think is important. I think I've seen clients who kind of, we sometimes as a culture, sometimes, so whether it's a country culture or a company culture, we tend to diminish our own achievements or take our achievements for granted or, kind of say, oh, that's okay, I did that, but I haven't done this. And I think it's important to pause and say, okay, this change has happened. How are you going to integrate it? First of all, how are you going to make it consistent change going forward to the point that you're not aware of it? And I think it's important to celebrate. I think it is important to celebrate. I don't necessarily mean having a drink, cutting a cake, bursting a balloon, not necessarily anything as programmatic as that. It could simply be a heartfelt, authentic acknowledgement of something having shifted. But it is important to say, I see that this has happened. I want you to feel good about it. I feel good about it. We did that. This is putting it a little colloquially. In an ideal sense, of course, the client should be saying, I did that. And
Yeah,
I did that with your coaching support.
correct.
That's what in the pristine sense, that's what should be emerging. But the spirit is pause. Everything is not about being on the treadmill and saying, okay, I've done 1 kilometer, now I'm going to 1.1, 1.2. Pause. Okay, you did this much. Feel good about it. Now let's move on.
Yeah, as they say, a coach should not leave his fingerprints on the job.
That's a good one. Yes, that's helpful.
So, Samir, we've looked at these four and eight, and you mentioned that five, six, and seven are definitely there.
Hmm.
Maybe there's another whole conversation one could have about that, from a different point of view. But I think we're coming to an important question, which I'm sure everybody would want to ask in the crowd here, because you have internal coaches and external coaches both, and
Yeah,
there could be something that you want to talk about on that. And here's the
yeah,
slide you have.
yeah. This is a very corporate kind of phenomenon. You have internal coaches, you have external coaches, you also have mentors. Now, each one has their own unique kind of role to play, and it's important to understand that corporates don't do things for no reason at all. They do it because there's a reason and there's a logic for it. An internal coach understands the context of the organization. They know how things are done around here. So they are not just about identifying the change, the need for a change. They are also very quick-witted in terms of the experiment that you're proposing in this safe space. Is it going to work in the larger organization, or does it need a tweak of some sort? They often come in with that kind of perspective and they share. What they miss out is sometimes the ability, I believe, the ability to ask blunt and direct questions, where an external coach has a distinct advantage. I've been on both sides of the table as an internal coach and as an external coach. As an internal coach, because you're aware of some of the dynamics and the political undercurrents of the organization, there are no go areas. There are areas that we don't touch. But an external coach can cheerfully walk in and say, hey, what about this? Why are you not talking about this? How does this impact you? Why are you so worried about this? And mentors, of course, come in as saying that this is how I did it, and this is probably how you should do it. You're new to this role, and if you have a sense of uncertainty, if you have a sense of nervousness, then this is how to deal with it. So that's a much more prescriptive kind of approach. Now, whichever of these three roles you are playing in the context of that individual, remember, it's unusual for an individual to have all three or even both internal and external, but it can happen. So I think one of the things to do is to check early in the process if there are other players, other people talking to the coachee. It's important to establish some kind of professional communication, again, respecting the boundaries and making sure that privacy is not violated. But you do need to know what is happening in terms of process in each of these interactions.
Yeah, who has the coaches here? Have you come across situations like this where the guy is getting fed from multiple coaches?
Yes, I have. It was a very interesting kind of situation. I think a particular organization, a person made a transition from, let's say, a middle management role to a senior management role, but the senior management role didn't have much room for error. Even if it was the first time you were doing that job, you had to get it right 99% of the time. And there was a lot of judgment called for and imperfect data, sometimes unavailable data. So it was really a kind of difficult situation to be in. Now, so first of all, the outgoing manager was moving to another part of the organization. So the outgoing manager was told, this guy, you should have a vested interest in his success. You should make sure he succeeds. Make yourself available to him day or night whenever he wants. Okay, done. Then an internal coach got appointed, saying that, as a coach, you have a great deal of expertise. You have a great deal of knowledge of this organization. You have da 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 da. You must. Third, an external coach got appointed. It was like, we have a person who needs this support and needs this help. Now, so this particular person came into the role and initially was very grateful. A lot of support, lot of direction, lot of guidance. 3 or 4 weeks later, the reality began to set. And 3 months later, he walked into his line manager's cabin and threw up his hands. He said, "This is not working. I can't work." And when the line manager asked him what had happened, he said, "Look, out of 5 day working week, 1 to 1.5 days, I'm being coached and mentored. When do and each one sets me an agenda for the next 15 days. So when do I actually do the work I'm supposed to do?"
He had to ask for mercy.
I know, too much of advice, too much of guidance. But there were two insights that emerged from that process. One was that the three players were not talking to each other.
Ah,
The predecessor, the internal coach, and the external coach.
so they
Again,
were all talking to the coachee, but not to each other.
each one knew of the existence of the other.
Oh,
But
they
it,
knew. Okay, but
yeah,
not
but it
talking.
had just not it the how do you put it? The thought, the mechanism for a conversation had not emerged. Had
Oh,
not been, and you have to consciously design for it, right? You can't. It doesn't.
ouch. Yeah.
It's not osmosis. It doesn't happen by itself. You
Mm.
need to actually work at it. And the second was that, of course, we had to immediately renegotiate all three players in that situation had to immediately renegotiate their terms. So, for example, the predecessor was told is that you were told to make yourself available. It was not as if you were expected to get into a conversation every week and say what is happening on this, what is happening on that. And the internal and external coaches also needed to have their contracts and their boundaries redefined. Eh, And of course, after a while, to be fair, the need for such intensive arrangement fell away. Partially also it fell away because there was a conversation that if you are throwing so much resource behind a person, does it reflect on the organization's own insecurity or on
Mm.
the individual's capability? So is there
Interesting.
a message for the line manager there? And
Interesting. So
and
if
and
you're an external coach, it's good to find out what's happening and
exactly.
get into a structured way of communicating with each of the other coaches
Mm.
rather than keep bombarding them and wondering why whatever you said the last time's not working now because maybe they got conflicting advice from another coach.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely true. And,
I
and
think
you know,
Saraswati wanted to ask a question here.
So I just want to add something to what Samir said, in
Mm.
terms of having internal coaches as well. So I've been in a situation, or actually many situations where there have been internal coaches, but I found that internal coaches have a different kind of coaching. So they're not the, like us, like ICF coaches. They are very different coaches. So they are possibly mentors rolled into coach and, enabling transition and so on and so forth. But I think became very useful was to, like Samir, you mentioned, to have that conversation between the three of us, including the reporting managers, so four actually, to have that conversation saying that, hey, where does one's role end and where does one's role begin? Right? That is one part of it. And the other part of it was also to say, how do we enable this conversation for the betterment of this person?
yeah.
Right, and therefore the contract actually became, instead of tripartite, it became a four-partite. I don't know what you call that, but it became a contract amongst four people
Mm.
saying that is there a need for us to come together, and if so, when,
Mm.
and have that kind of conversation, and therefore designing the entire thing. And as I'm saying this, another thing that comes to my mind is something that Peter Hawkins says: always be contracting. So while
Mm.
there is a larger contract and goals and so on and so forth, I think contracting itself needs to be looked at slightly differently, because there's lots of things that happen between a coach and a client.
Mm.
And therefore, it could be right from the point of view saying that, hey, okay, I could not do my actions, right?
Mm.
And therefore, what's the recontract you need at that point in time, right?
Correct.
I mean, as simple as that. Yeah.
And it's so
Just wanted to add
beautifully
to what you said.
wonderful, Saraswati. In fact, it leads us to this point that Samir is trying to make on collaboration. And I think it's worth having Samir talk about. We've already talked about these
Mm.
different players in the game, but
Mm.
there's something I see here about formal context and informal context, which maybe Samir wants to tell us something more.
In a way, it's a great segue because what Saraswati was saying was also, a kind of linked to this. You get all the
Right.
players into conversation. What is the purpose of this process? And I think the insight that I also had for a moment while listening to you, Saraswati, was that the coachee is still at the center of the process. It is about the individual. It's not about whether it's two, three, or four other stakeholders or four other coach slash mentors in the process. But what is it that we're really looking for here? What is it that we want to achieve? And having that conversation around the informal context, which can sometimes be a little difficult for an external coach to catch on to because there are not too many. Like what you said, Saraswati, about an internal coach knowing how things are done around here and get past this and work through that and so on. The informal context is not always available to an external coach, but we still need to make some kind of an effort to understand it. You don't need to be influenced by it. In fact, it if the external coach gets influenced by internal processes or informal processes, there is a much bigger problem at hand. But simply to be aware that this is how the dynamic is playing out, and that's largely a matter of having conversations. You could, I've often found that whoever's appointed the external coach is a great source of information on informal context, and some of it you pick up from talking to other people, and sometimes I think what I call the smell of the place. And go into an office and you find a large number of wood and steel cabins and doors without visibility, or are you in an open office with a lot of people spread out with half partitions? You can kind of get a sense of the energy of the place itself when you walk through it. That's one of the reasons, for example, I always make it a point that the first meeting or the pre-meeting with the client and with the corporate is at the corporate site. As far as possible, I like to walk through. I mean, now, of course, I think people have gotten used to a mix of virtual and face-to-face sessions. I have one or two clients who insist on face-to-face sessions, but most are comfortable. But even in cases where people say that, we can do it virtually, it doesn't matter. I'm like, no, the first meeting, I'd like to see you face-to-face. I'd like to see your office. I'd like to meet you face-to-face. I
I think
found
that's, yeah, wonderful what you just said, Samir.
I found collaboration very difficult if you know someone only virtually.
Um,
I mean, even you and I, Dexter, we go back to what, 2007, 2008 or so,
yeah,
first met. So a lot of the comfort that I experience is because of the
of
kind of
those days, yeah,
skills that we built up
absolutely.
at that point in time. So
Yeah, that's
I
very
look
true.
for opportunities to meet people, meet, talk.
Yeah, wonderful. So, when you talk about informal context, it reminds me of this phrase that says, still waters run deep.
Yeah, I've heard that. I know.
Because you never know what's lurking
Hmm?
in those still waters.
Beneath the surface.
Yeah, beneath the surface. So it's important to take a dive, I think, and try and investigate what's there, because what is not said and not seen can sometimes upset the apple cart.
Totally. And yeah, you get that sense. Yeah, coming back to this point about collaboration and being face to face, you get a lot of cues when you're in front of someone.
Hmm.
You carry that knowledge, carry that learning, so it helps. And I think the last point we've specified quite a bit, or we've gone through
Correct, I
quite a
know.
bit so far, the boundaries and communication,
Yeah,
so
because I
that we
think,
be
yeah,
confident.
when you try and figure that collaboration out, you're also looking at boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's paradoxical, but collaboration happens when you're aware of boundaries.
Right.
Are not aware of boundaries, then collaboration can be very difficult because everyone assumes that everyone is doing it.
That,
Mhm.
that's a good one. That's a good catch there, Samir. Yeah.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I mean, not only the client, but even you must grow as a coach.
Yeah, that is important. I think at the end of the day, um, I'll tackle this in two different ways. One is, of course, I think there's a micro learning and a macro learning for the coach through the process. So I, for example, often ask individual coaches at the end of every session, I say, what could I have done differently? And that's your growth, that's your learning. Because if the individual is genuinely engaged in the process, they will tell you one or two things that you could have done differently. They'll also tell you, the first few sessions, they'll also tell you what they liked. But as the comfort level grows, it'll also share with you that, that you found this missing, or we'd have liked a bit more of this, and there's nothing to be said except that you'll make up for it next time, or you'll cover it the next time. And is learning for yourself in terms of self-awareness. At a macro level, I'd like to think about when a client makes a shift. I like to think about what my interventions were that actually enabled that shift. How concise was I? How much did I speak versus how much did the client speak? How effective were my interventions? When did the shift happen? How did I know that the shift happened?
Right.
And so on. At a larger level with the organization, I would certainly say most organizations, well, I've said often that's a polite way of putting it, most organizations don't understand subtlety. It's important to go out to the key stakeholders, which could be HR or which could be a CXO or a senior manager, put yourself out there and say that I'm good at this, this is what I do. my success stories, if the context and the situation permits, you can also say that in your organization, I've coached 1, 2, and 3 people, name them. The very modesty is not going to be appreciated on something like this. So as your growth, as your learning, the first couple of points I made address learning and development. This is about making sure that you stay in business,
Right.
making sure that you stay in the organization. As
On
a
that note, Samir, thank you. We have now another 15 minutes left, which I believe we can get to the question and answers for about 10 minutes.
Sure.
And I'm sure you have so much more to say. We would require another 900 minutes, not just 90 minutes. And even that won't be enough. So maybe I can ask Saraswati to lead us into the question and answers, and we can, you know,
Sure,
hear.
thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks.
over to you.
There are three questions in the chat which are still pending.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe bring that up and then open it to others who could, possibly come off mute and ask their question.
Mhm.
So let's start with Sandeep's question. Sandeep says, it'll be good to know how many Indian companies have been able to democratize in a sustained manner.
So by Indian company, I assume you mean family managed Indian owned companies, because let's be clear, Tatas are also an Indian company. Aditya Birla is also an Indian company. So let's not. I mean, in a sense, I think what we are using is shorthand. Um, I personally don't kind of appreciate too much of the usage of Indian company versus MNC. Several Indian companies are multinational and so on. So you get the broad drift of what I'm saying. I think it's important to acknowledge that different organizations are at very different stages in this learning cycle. There are some who are very, very savvy about it. I'm not going to name companies, so we've already named some of them, but the largest companies with a very strong professional management base and very strong practices in HR they're very savvy about coaching. They know exactly what they're doing. And when they go out looking into the market looking for a coach, they know exactly what to look for. They also know that different coaches meet different needs. So it's not a one size fits all. They're not going out there and saying, you know, I've got a template and does it do you kind of fit into it? You also have people who are evaluating the process and saying, look, this is the first time we've appointed a coach. What do you think we should be doing? I have a client in the Middle East who came and said this. He said, we've never used a coach before. Do you think it might work for us? I said, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's see what these are the limitations, these are the possibilities, these are the pluses, minuses for you as I see it. We had a great conversation, and I think he went ahead to experiment with some coaching work. And there are others who say coaching is a waste of time. I mean, to be quite honest, I can't deny that there are organizations that don't do coaching, and if you ask me, that's fine, because unless they feel the need to do it, I'm never going to be able to go in there and create the need for them, especially if they're approaching it with the mindset that this is not going to work, this is not for me. So to answer your question, different organizations, different stages of the process. Ask the questions that you need early on in the early stages of the process, and work with the process, whatever it is. It may not be to your liking, that's fine. It doesn't have to be to your liking or my liking. But at the end of it, are we getting clarity from it in terms of this is what we need? Remember sometimes that maybe coaching is not what they need. They need a lot of mentoring. They need a lot of, input training, as in classroom sessions on how do you do this, how do you do that, this is the process. Maybe they're at that stage. Fair enough. Let them work their way through it. I mean, if you can engage with them, not as a coach, that's getting into different space. But as a coach, you have to wait for the right opportunity and circumstances to emerge.
Oh, I think that's a great thing you said there, Samir, because sometimes you get so obsessed with the fact that you are a coach that you don't want to look at the actual need.
I mean, at the risk of sounding a bit, I mean, but let me say it anyway. Don't approach it with the situation that, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. Coaching will not work in all circumstances. It
No,
depends on what the problem is.
I think that's really true.
So work with the problem, whatever that is for that particular client.
Yeah. Before Saraswati, you ask the next question, I just want to remind our participants that by now you may see a link for the feedback form, and later on there could be a CCEU form link that comes in your chat. So just a heads up alert for that. Um, I think Nandini, if you're listening in, maybe you can just tell us, is it already up
Yeah.
or is it coming up?
No, I will launch the poll now, and then I will update the CCU form link in the chat box.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm sorry for
Yes.
interrupting, but Saraswati, back to you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Nandini.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there are a couple of more questions, and I'm kind of taking this one which just came up because it sounded like an interesting one. Has there been any experience in the corporate world when the client or the coachee has feared being coached because they've not wished to be vulnerable, about their weaknesses?
I
Okay,
think,
so the poll has come up.
yeah, I think if I can answer that question, I think all clients go through that stage, no? At least whether they go through it for 1 minute or 1 hour or one session or the entire program is the question. So I think rather than looking at it as a condition or as a situation in the world, in this, outside the coach, the question that I would really flip the question and say, as a coach, what am I doing to encourage and to nurture that sense of vulnerability in my client? After all,
Mm.
if vulnerability can be a strength. It need not. It is not. It's not a space of weakness. It's a source of strength if you use it in the best way possible. So how do you operate from a space of vulnerability? Is the value I can add as a coach in that situation? So it does happen. Yes.
Thanks. Thank you for that. In fact, um, so I
You-
remember a particular example
Hmm.
where the client, where the organization mandated that you will be coached. So
Hmm.
everybody was ticking the box saying that I am being coached. And somewhere it shows up in the conversation itself. And therefore you
Hmm.
want to go back and ask them, hey, is this really what you want to do? And maybe this is not the right time, you
Yeah,
know.
but that
And
that might not be fear. That might not be arising out of vulnerability, right?
yeah,
Or a worry about vulnerability. That's like you can't tell me what to do.
sure.
In a sense, I don't
Or
know. I'm hypothesizing, but you're right. I mean, it could be either.
or maybe they just need time to get to the path of being able to look at themselves. So that seemed to be kind of something that happened. I just
Hmm.
thought I'd share that. There's one more question, and I think, what do you do when the client asks you to hold back the coaching sessions frequently due to internal issues and challenges? Obviously, the what's at stake is the flow of the rhythm of the coaching gets disturbed. But what do you do when the client says, okay, let's reschedule, let's hold back, or lots going on at work?
Mhm. My first response is to say that what really is happening here. There are very, very few situations where there is such overwhelming pressure from the organization that you need to stop doing something. Personally, I won't put a percentage onto it, but there are very few such instances. So is it an activity trap? I'm too busy. I don't like this session. I worry what I'm going. I haven't done the work. What is the fear? So I would pin it down and say what really is happening here. What is the problem? If you're not interested, then then let's explore something else. Maybe coaching is not the best solution here, or whatever it is. But if I'm not even able to get to that session, then I would walk to the sponsor, whether it's HR or line manager, and say, look, we have a problem here. Because it's not about whether I get paid for a session that doesn't happen or not, but if the session itself is not happening, I'm wasting my time as a coach. And presumably the sponsor, by then there is enough clarity on the agenda and enough clarity on the stakes. So the sponsor should then step in and say, you need to make time for this. So So no, it should not happen that a client is frequently postponing meetings. It means that there is there is an issue that we haven't, that both of us haven't understood, and we need to explore that more fully with the support of the sponsor as required.
Good. So maybe time to have a conversation and then time to have a larger conversation as well, you know. Okay, thank you.
So, Smriti,
Yep.
are we done with all the questions or something?
There are two more, and I just wanted to take a check on time because
Yeah.
we are about 8 minutes away.
Correct. No, please go ahead, because I'm
Yeah.
sure people would hang on for a few more minutes if if
Sure.
it's important for them. Yeah.
And I thought these two questions were very interesting because one asks about, are corporate teams readying up the identified employee who needs to be coached adequately on what to expect from coaching? So it sounds like when you're getting into coaching and the person who needs to be coached, is the person prepared to say, okay, this journey is going to be different from mentoring? This journey is going to be different from somebody coming and advising me, telling me what to do? Is that, is that something that corporates are actually focusing on?
Yeah, I would say so, but I wouldn't take it for granted. I think depending on which corporate you're talking to, and what's your level of experience with that corporate. But I would make a point of, as I said, in my case, the first conversation is all about these things: differences, ethics, confidentiality, boundaries, what it can do, can't do, and so I make sure I cover everything the first time. If I would, you don't, I would personally advise that, because you don't lose anything. Even if an organization has a great deal of experience with coaching and they're already familiar with all the processes and so on, there's no harm in touching on it again, even if the person has heard it all before. Say, take a few minutes and talk about it. I
In fact,
wouldn't
one of the
assume. Let's see. Yeah.
So just add on to one of the good practices that I found is that, having that as part of your own coaching practice, saying that, hey, is the corporate ready? Do we need to have that conversation? Do we need to have that setup of expectations as well?
Mhm.
While there could always be something different that emerges, but at least, that's a good practice for you to do as a coach.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. It's a great opportunity to explore, maybe learn something new. Also, given that in organizations people move around a lot, and now you have people moving between organizations as well, it's always possible that something has shifted or something has changed, by 5% or 10%, but a significant 5 or 10%. So it's kind of also important to get your contracting with the stakeholders straight, other than the coachee. So that's important, yeah.
Got that, Sonia. And just one last question, because it's interesting because there seems to be a trend of shorter coaching journeys. So I remember when I started coaching, it was about 18 sessions. Then it became 12 sessions. Then it became 10 sessions. Then it became 8. So it seems to be shorter coaching journeys. And the question that Malbika is asking is that what happens when there are only 4 sessions? Right. And particularly, for coaches who are at the mid level, and it seems insufficient, to be able to actually demonstrate any change by the coachee. But still, it's important as a business for you as a coach. What do you do?
So I'm hypothesizing that the concern in corporates is, one, to the general pressure to achieve results fast. And the second, let's face it, could be a cost concern. 18 sessions cost more than 4 sessions. There's no doubt about that. Yeah? Whatever it might be, whatever the numbers might be, but there could be a cost pressure. There would definitely be constraints of a budget that the HR team would know about, and so on. Um, so, for example, I would say, it would put pressure on me to focus much more on what is the change that the coachee is going to demonstrate. I think every coachee comes into a conversation with the expectation that, if it's a developmental approach, is that I will be a great leader by the end of the process, or a great manager at the end of the process. If it's a remedial approach, it's like my problem of delegation will be solved, or my problem of making PowerPoint presentations will be solved, or my problem of whatever will be solved. I think there's a lot more pressure in the process to early on set expectations in terms of what is really going to change. How are you going to measure that change? How are you going to know that it has changed? I think the brass tacks of, really the entire what the coaching conversation is all about. Get that into place. And I have found it, in fact, in one particular case, I suggested to a client, I said, let's not meet after 2 weeks, let's meet after 6 weeks. We'll do a telephonic check-in after 2 weeks, and every second week, if that's okay with you. I suggested it as part of the contracting at the end of the session, because I felt that the organization is not going to, for whatever budget reasons, is not going to go beyond 4 sessions. From a personal point of view, if I do those 4 sessions once every 2 weeks, I'm not going to see the change happening. Neither is the client going to see it. So sometimes it becomes important to say that less is more. Work with the process and see what happens. So that's how I would approach it. But the truth is that yes, timelines are getting contracted. There is pressure to deliver more faster. So then what is that more? What is that faster? And what's the timeline I'm working? At the end of the day, remember that as a coach, you have voice. You have a lot of voice in the process. It's not as if sometimes we tend to diminish our own power. It's not as if we don't have power in the process. Corporates will listen. To a logically made out case, they will listen.
Wonderful.
Or to my example, if you have to improve your PowerPoint presentation skills, the corporate will say 2 sessions are enough. But if you are seeking to become a more effective manager, there will be a longer conversation. It doesn't matter. Rather, it will happen.
Great. So
Okay.
before we actually sign off, we have a few more things to do. So please don't go away, anybody. First of all, like to thank you, Saraswati, for asking the questions and being so on point with them. But Samir, we really appreciate you, the time and energy you have spent, not just for this 90 minutes, but all the time that we came up to this, including doing a
Good.
full run with you. Um, and
Yeah.
we need to take a picture. So I think Nandini is waiting to do that. So we've got to put on our
Yeah.
camera, smile,
Yes,
as if the
please.
world is our oyster, and that we just paid $1 million for coaching.
Yeah.
And
Let's all look forward to the day that happens. You pay $1 million for coaching. I want to be at the end of the queue.
no, no, no. And while I would like people from the audience to ask two questions directly to Samir. I mean, so I know everyone's been silent, so two direct questions from two different people. That means a question each. And in the meanwhile, the rest of us can type in the chat box something for Samir in terms of 2 to 3 words. What was the special insight you're taking away from this session? If you can type that in, then we can preserve that chat and offer it to Samir also later. In the
I'll
meanwhile, I see some people are raising hands. So those of you who want to ask a direct question, please unmute and ask away.
Hi, Samir. This is Avinash from Hyderabad.
Hi, Avinash.
Hey,
Hi.
I heard you're in Hyderabad, so welcome to our city.
Thank you. Thank you.
You made a point just towards the end of the conversation about the kind of a report or a return on investment that corporates would like to understand what they can get from coaches or
Hmm.
from the coaching process. Any tips on how that can be articulated back to the corporates? What is the best way to tell them that, okay, this is how you can expect? How do you represent that ROI back to them?
Mm, Okay, I'll tell you what I do, and it seems to work. It seems to make an impact. It's not mathematical, first of all. So I give illustrations of the clients I've worked with and what the outcome was. It's a table. So, for example, one of my early clients was a corporate employee who had a game-changing business idea, as in a different product, not related to the company he was working for. And he had a choice between selling the product and resigning from the company and operationalizing it himself. So the whole process was, he approached me in his individual capacity, and the whole process was about which way do I take this. He took the decision that worked best for him, but I quote this as one example. Another example I quote is of a person that's a more remedial example who needed to work on two or three different problems to achieve a promotion that he was looking for, got the promotion. Similar case, another person who decided that the corporate was not for him. He actually decided that corporate life was not for him. He went solo, went entrepreneur, and went out. So you give 4, 5, 6 examples of this sort and make them as snappy and brief. This is like what I have is a table with just 1, 2 boxes per case. And there are only about 5 or 6. I just keep updating it and knock out the older one and put in the newer one. That seems to make a difference with the prospects I work with. Because in this, in this profession, I don't think you can demonstrate ROI in purely financial terms. If you could, that would be great. If you could say that someone achieved, his ratings went up by a factor of 2 because of the coaching I did, great. But that doesn't happen. I haven't seen that happening. Neither does the evidence present itself, nor is there such a linear cause and effect. So where you see that linear cause and effect is what you need to zero in on. That is the ROI. That's what we demonstrate.
Thanks, Avinash, and thanks, Samir, for that. Sandeep Kalra wanted to, I think, ask a question. Sandeep, you can unmute and ask.
Hi, Samir. Thanks a lot for such a wonderful explanation.
Thank you.
It's been really insightful. And what I heard you say a number of times in terms of the word remedial, and that is what my observation also has been in most of the corporates. The ask is for that rather than coaching. And even in large PSUs, we find because the board has asked. And they also have to basically tick that as to how many sessions done for the leaders so that they can report in their annual report. So, but the real corporate coaching so far in India has been just like owning a Mercedes or an Audi. It's still not come to the mainstream. And we are all waiting it to happen. Will it actually happen?
So your question is, will it actually happen? I'm convinced it will. I think the traction that we're getting is increasing exponentially year on year. Just look at a simple stat like the number of coaches who are accredited every year. Look at the numbers that ICF puts out. How many more ACCs in the last 12 months, PCCs, MCCs, and obviously there's the credibility being attached to the qualification and to the process. So to my mind, there's absolutely no doubt. It is picking up. And my own experience, my own observation, anecdotally, I don't want to bore you with a lot of data, a lot of anecdotal data, but I'm convinced there's no way except up. I think there's a great opportunity for all of us to want to impact the process, to participate in the process and to impact it. And I think, yes, while it is some of the work that we do is remedial, I think one, it's an opportunity to demonstrate success and capability. So don't diss it. And second, every time you gain that credibility is an opportunity to have a larger conversation and say, why are you doing only remedial kind of work with the people, with the individuals who matter and the individuals who decide? It's a process. You need to work through it. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's not going to happen without you either. That's the point.
So we've got to say bye to Saraswati because she's going to host another session. So thanks, Saraswati. And I will see you again, of course. And in the meanwhile, Suman Sethi, last question that we'll take, and then just informal chat or networking. Shall we take this last question? Suman, please unmute and ask. This would be the last question for the night.
Yeah, thanks, Dexter. Samir, thanks so much for the insights. And I think what I particularly liked was your very gently firm approach to challenges and conflicts between stakeholders. So thanks for that. I have a question which, I've struggled with many times, which is really when a lot of the issues or the derailers for the client, the person you're coaching, are actually coming from the manager who has who's also the sponsor for that engagement, right? So a lot of the manager's style is a big barrier And you can see that. You can see that in your own interactions with the manager. So you've also, in a sense, corroborated that. How do you handle that? Because that's hard.
That is hard. That is hard. I wish it's a great question, Suman. I wish I had an easy answer to that question, but I don't. Because if your sponsor's style is causing problems for his own direct report, that's evidently a conversation that's not happened between the two of them as yet.
Correct. Yeah.
I would not want to be the one to convey the feedback first to the line manager unless he asks for it.
Right.
But then I would ask him, what has emerged in your appraisal conversations? How much of listening do you do? What kind of questions do you ask? How long is the conversation? That itself is the most telling marker. I kind of set a record in one of the organizations I work for, which has then been seen as the benchmark. Each one of my direct subordinates would have a 2-hour appraisal conversation with me, of which half an hour was performance and 1.5 hours was how did you achieve that performance? What went right, what went wrong? So once they got comfortable, they used to, they used to often give me highly, straight feedback and saying that this doesn't work with me. Like, okay, it doesn't work with you. You can talk to the HR teams. Ask them what is to be done in this situation. Sometimes HR leaders, mind you, but not people very much down the line, could have the capacity to intervene in a situation. If nothing, and there are diplomatic ways of doing it. You can run a multi-source feedback or a 360-degree across all leaders of the organization. You can have a coach for the line manager as well.
Yeah.
And then the feedback could find its way back through a different route and so on.
Yeah.
But yes, I would respect, as I said, I am saying that I would not be the one to inform the line manager. And I am saying it's difficult.
Yeah.
In that process, to working with the direct report, one on managing frustration, managing stress, improving communication. Sometimes there are genuine style differences. So the subordinate could also learn to flex their style a bit.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Alternatives exist there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. I think some thought on that. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Suman, for asking that. Thank you again, Samir. We are at the end of the session. If anyone wants to say anything in terms of closing remarks, I'd like to hand over to whoever wants to say something. I see Sanjeev Bhatia, president of the ICF Mumbai chapter, is with us. Sanjeev, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Samir. The very practical approach. We all have been facing the same thing. Yes, our experience somewhere the same, somewhere is slightly different because of the kind of organization, kind of people we are interacting with. But yes, the flexibility of the coach is also very important to understand and be vulnerable and not to go with the fixated goal of the mind in the coaching. And I think that's what you covered very nicely. I think while we've been talking about the client's vulnerability, I think coach vulnerability will also works here very well. And that's where you can say, yes, sorry, it doesn't work with me, or most probably you can start creating your own boundary by being vulnerable. I think you touched this point in a somewhat different way, but I loved it. And I'm sure the people who are still staying after 10 minutes of the cutoff time, that speaks volume about your session. I really congratulate you. I really admire Dexter to get the right person on board like you, and Society to coordinate this very well. I wish you all the best, Samir, and the team here, the managing committee, Dexter and others, to do many more wonders like this. Let's create the magic together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sanjeev, and good night. And thank you again, Samir. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.
I'm going to be a little sad not to be in touch with you every second day as I was across.
But you could always do that. That's not a problem.
I will do that. And I'm waiting to see your next novel now.
Next year, 2020.
Some of your stories were pretty hair-raising in this in the Parijat tree.
Yes.
I loved it. I loved it really. Amazing, amazing. I'd have never associated you with that book and stories like that. So kudos to you for bringing that creative streak in you to the fore. I think we could see that in this webinar today also.
I enjoyed that, but we'll talk about fiction some other time.
Yes, certainly so. All right. Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody,
much.
and good night.
Thank you all.
And
Great.
thank you for
Great
staying
show.
on and being so energized. That I just made a comment saying I could feel the energy all the way here. So thank you.
Thank
Right
you.
then.
Thank you all.
Nandini,
Thank you,
Great
Sameer.
and
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks,
Dexter.
Amlesh.
Thanks, Saraswati.
Stay in touch. Ciao. Bye.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sameer.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
think,
Bye,
yeah.
everybody.